Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to sew block number 4 for April 2021 in our Jelly Roll Block of the Month challenge. If you'd like to participate, check the description right under this video. You'll find a link to my Facebook group where you can get all the files you need. So let's get sewing. So as we get started, I'm sure you all or many of you have already seen a quilt called Jelly Roll Race. So this one is called Jelly Roll Race 2, and we're going to do it a little different. I think that this way is more practical when we're just doing one block. So to explain, if you were doing a Jelly Roll Race, the original style with all Jelly Roll strips, you would line them all up like you do for binding and do one after another continuous until you had the entire roll sewn together, and you would do this kind of diagonal seam and cut off the excess and just continue like that until all your strips were sewn together. And then you would start cutting them the width of the quilt that you want to do. But I thought, since we're doing just one block, this is actually my binding from another quilt. Since we're doing just one block, I thought doing it that way on the diagonal might be a lot of waste. We might end up with a lot of waste. So as I was exploring YouTube, I saw that Jenny Doan had a second version called Jelly Roll Race 2, and that's what we're going to do today. It works better for our situation when we're doing just single blocks instead of a whole quilt. So there's a lot of cuts in it, so I have printed up the PDF that I've included with this file for you, and I wanted to show you that you're going to do lighter white, a dark, medium, dark, medium. So you have 4 different fabrics and you have your dark or light. So that's what we're cutting today, or what I've actually cut, and I'll show it to you. I'm going to refer to all these cuts just to make sure that I don't give you the wrong information. I prefer to tell you what I've recorded in the PDF. So for your lightest fabric or white fabric, you're going to cut 6 cuts of 2.5 by 2.5, and then our B fabric, which is the dark one, we're going to cut a 7. They're all 2.5 because they're jelly roll strips. A 7.5, a 5.5, and a 3.5. That's fabric B, so A and B. Fabric C is a medium color. We have 4.5, 3.5, and 2 cuts of 2.5 square. That's fabric C. Fabric D, dark again. We have 7.5, 6.5, and 5.5. And fabric E, we have 2 cuts at 8.5, 2 strips. So A, B, C, D, E. And this is the best way I found to put them together, by assigning letters to them so it's easier to sort. So for my layout, I'm going to refer to the PDF again. I don't want to mix that up. So let's put this aside. I'll keep them in order. Important not to get them all mixed up. And my 2 at 8.5. There we go. I'll line them up that way. So we're going to do 6 rows. For the first row, I have fabric D at 6.5. Just make sure I have the right one. 3, 6, no, wrong one. See how easily you can mix it up? So there's the 6.5. Then I have a 2.5. And I have a C, A, B, C, at 4.5. So there's my first row. So in this pattern, instead of having diagonal seams on the strips, you have a coin. You have a 2.5 inch light color or white coin to join them together. On your second row, we have C at 3.5. Then we have our white coin. And we have B, the longest strip, 7.5. On our third row, we have our 8.5 inch strip. Then we have our light coin, fabric A again. And we have our C at 2.5. And then next in our fourth row, we have our B color at 5.5, our coin, and our D at 5.5. I will press all these. I definitely need to press them. And then on our fifth row, we have C again at 2.5. Then we have our coin, our light color, and then we have our long strip, 8.5, our letter E, and then our last row is D at 7.5, our coin, and our fabric B at 3.5. So you can see why I'm referring to the PDF, because if I don't, I'll mix up the cuts. You want to make sure that when you lay them out, you have a rectangle, but when you sew it all together, it will be, as long as you're consistent about doing 1/4 inch seams, you'll end up with 12.5 by 12.5. So it's a simple block to sew together. You don't have any nesting to do. You're going to do 1/4 inch seams, press towards the darker fabric, press between every row. We're going to sew 1 row at a time until we have all 6 rows sewed separately. So I'm going to start sewing now, and I'll be back to show you each row as it's done. Here's my first row, press towards the darker fabric. I also wanted to mention that you want to double check your layout. You don't want any colors touching each other, like you don't want to have these two in the same row or one after another, because you'll lose the pattern. You also want to make sure that your whites or light color coins are not lining up on top of each other. That wouldn't work. So you want to make sure that you've laid it all out properly. So double check your layout. So let's do our second row, and I'll be back. There we go. And I've done the same, press towards the outside, towards the darker fabrics. And we'll just continue like this for the next 4 rows. And there we go. We have all 6 rows sewn together. I'm seeing a lot of sun on my table, a lot of glare. So I apologize for that, but it's a sunny day. So the next thing we're going to do is separate into 3 rows. Like we did, if you did the March bonus block, you know that we did them in 3 separate rows, 2 groups of 3. The reason for this is it's a good habit. If you were doing 42-inch strips and you just sewed one continuously after another, you would end up with a bow in your quilt. It would bow. So you want to do groups of 3. I do 3 max. Some people do 4 just to keep the seam straight. And you also want to sew, let's say, left to right, and your second one, right to left. That also will help to keep your rows straight. So we're going to sew 2 groups of 3. When that's all done and super well pressed, we'll bring the 2 groups together and finish our block. So I'm going to start by sewing my top group, and you can see no nesting. Very simple block, easy to do. I'm going to sew this one left to right. And there's our first 2. And you want to make sure when you're sewing these long rows together, you also want to make sure that you're keeping these seams flat. You don't want them to be twisted under your sewing, or just try to make sure you're keeping them flat and do a really good flat press. So there's our first 2. I'm going to bring up this 3rd row, and for this one, I'm going to sew right to left to keep it nice and straight. And here's our top 3 rows, and you can see that my seams are nice and straight. I don't have any bowing in it because I've done left to right and right to left. I've pressed everything super flat and double checked that all my seams were flat as I was sewing them together. I happened to press this one towards the top and this one towards the bottom. Because you have no nesting involved, it's your decision which way you press those. It really isn't going to make any difference. So now we're going to start on the bottom. Once again, I'm going to do the same thing, left to right, right to left. And make sure my seams are sitting very flat so I don't have any buckling. Here's my 4th and 5th row. And now we'll bring this one up, line it up on the edge, and I'm going to sew right to left. And here's our bottom 3 rows. This sun is very bright. I think I'm going to stop here, wait for the sun to move, and I'll continue the video. So we're set to continue now. The sun has moved away a bit. I wanted to mention, when I sewed this row together, I immediately realized that I had sewn my trees, my directional fabric, upside down. This can happen, but I didn't want to rip it apart. So what I did was sewed the next 2 upside down, and when I'm ready to assemble my quilt, I'll just make sure to flip the block around. So these are the only 3 directional pieces, so they'll all be facing the right way then. So we're going to do our final seam in this block and give it a good press, and you can see that I have some threads I need to trim up to clean it all up, and we'll be finished our block. So I'll be right back. And there we go. Our block is finished. You can see that I've pressed everything nice and flat. I press after every seam. Everything is nice and flat, nothing is twisted. We keep it nice and clean that way. I'll clean up all my little threads as I mentioned. And when I install it in the actual quilt, I will flip it around so the trees are facing up and not upside down. So this is the original layout. And there we go, Jelly Roll Race 2. I hope you're going to enjoy sewing this block. As I mentioned, if you're not already participating in our Jelly Roll block of the month, check the description right under this video. You'll find a link to my Facebook group where you can join in. Everything is there. Thank you for watching.